The rain over the Rossi estate wasn't washing away the sins of the night. It was drowning them. Under the roar of the thunder, no one heard the shovel striking the wet earth. No one heard the muffled cries of a 6-year-old boy trapped inside a wooden crate descending into the dark, cold ground. Camilla, the woman who was supposed to be his mother, wiped the mud from her diamond ring and smiled. She thought she had buried the heir to the empire forever. But she didn't know that 50 yards away, hidden in the shadows of the cypress trees, a terrified Maid was watching. And that Maid was about to start a war. The Rossi estate sat on the edge of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, a sprawling fortress of stone and iron that whispered of old money and older blood. To the outside world, Dominic Rossi was a legitimate businessman, a shipping magnate who moved steel and oil across the Great Lakes. But inside these walls, the staff knew better. They knew why armed guards patrolled the perimeter every hour on the hour. They knew why the basement was soundproofed. And they knew that Dominic Rossi was the capo of the Midwest families, a man you did not cross. Haley Brooks, however, tried not to know any of that. She was just a maid. At 24, Haley was invisible. She kept her head down, her blonde hair tied in a tight bun, and her hands busy scrubbing floors that were already clean. She needed this job. Her father's medical bills at St. Mary's Hospital were piling up, and the envelope of cash the Rossi estate manager handed her every Friday was the only thing keeping her family afloat. "Haley!" The sharp voice snapped through the grand hallway. Haley froze, clutching her feather duster. She turned to see Camilla Vance descending the spiral staircase. Camilla was breathtakingly beautiful, a former runway model with raven black hair and eyes like polished obsidian. She was also the coldest woman Haley had ever met. In 3 weeks, she would marry Dominic Rossi, becoming the stepmother to his only son, Nico. "Yes, Miss Vance?" Haley asked, lowering her eyes. "The flowers in the drawing room are wilting," Camilla said, inspecting her manicure. "Replace them. Lilies. Only lilies. And ensure that Brat is out of the way. I have guests coming for tea, and I don't want him making those noises." Haley's heart tightened. The Brat was Nico, Dominic's 6-year-old son. Since his mother died in a car accident 2 years ago, an accident Dominic was still investigating, Nico hadn't spoken a word. He was small, frail, and communicated only through soft hums and frantic gestures. Dominic adored the boy, but his business kept him away for weeks at a time, leaving Nico vulnerable. "Nico is in the library, Miss Vance," Haley said softly. "He's just drawing." "I don't care what he's doing," Camilla hissed, stepping closer. She smelled of Chanel No. 5 and malice. "I don't want to see him. Put him in the attic if you have to. Just get him out of my sight." As Camilla swept past her toward the kitchen, Haley hurried to the library. She found Nico sitting under a massive mahogany desk, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. He looked up, his big brown eyes wide with fear. He sensed the hostility in the house. Children always know. "It's okay, Nico," Haley whispered, crawling under the desk to sit with him. She pulled a chocolate bar from her apron pocket. "Look what I have." Nico offered a tiny, fragile smile. It was the highlight of Haley's day. She had bonded with the boy over the last 6 months. While the other staff ignored him or treated him like a nuisance, Haley saw a lonely child who missed his father. Later that evening, the front doors burst open. The atmosphere in the house shifted instantly. The guards straightened up. The air grew heavy. Dominic Rossi had returned. He walked in, wearing a charcoal Italian suit, his coat wet from the rain. He was a terrifyingly handsome man, with a jawline that could cut glass and scars on his knuckles that told violent stories. He handed his coat to the butler and looked around, his eyes scanning for one thing only. "Where is my son?" Dominic asked, his voice a low rumble. "Dom, darling." Camilla appeared from the dining room, a glass of champagne in hand. She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him deeply. "You're back early." Dominic tolerated the kiss, but pulled away gently. "Where is Nico, Camilla?" "Oh, he's sleeping," Camilla lied smoothly. "He had a tantrum earlier. Poor thing, he's so unstable. I had the nanny put him to bed early for his own good." Haley, standing in the shadows with a tray of water, gripped the silver handle tight. "Liar," she thought. "You locked him in his room without dinner." Dominic's face softened with worry. "I'll go see him." "No, let him rest," Camilla insisted, grabbing Dominic's hand and placing it on her waist. "You look exhausted. Come, have a drink with me. We have wedding details to discuss. The florist needs a deposit, and the caterer from Chicago needs your approval on the menu." Dominic hesitated, looking toward the stairs, then back at his fiancée. He was a man drowning in grief and responsibility, and he desperately wanted to believe that Camilla was the mother figure Nico needed. He nodded, defeated. "Fine. But I see him first thing in the morning." Haley watched them walk away. She felt a sick pit in her stomach. Dominic was a powerful man, feared by enemies across the state, but he was completely blind to the viper in his own bed, and Haley knew, with a terrifying certainty, that if someone didn't protect Nico, the boy wouldn't survive to see the wedding. 3 days later, the tension in the Rossi estate reached a breaking point. Haley was polishing the silver in the dining room when she overheard a hushed conversation in the study next door. The door was slightly ajar. She knew she should move away. Eavesdropping on a Mafia Don's fiancé was a good way to disappear, but the tone of the voice froze her feet. It wasn't Camilla talking to Dominic. It was Camilla talking on a burner phone. "I told you, I need more time," Camilla whispered, her voice trembling with a rare rage. "Dominic is being careful with the accounts. I can't just transfer $5 million without him noticing." Haley pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. "Don't threaten me, Luca," Camilla hissed. "If you tell Dominic about my debts, about what happened in Vegas, I'll ruin you. I am going to be his wife." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Then Camilla's face went pale. Though Haley couldn't see it, she could hear the fear in the silence. "The boy?" Camilla asked, her voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "What about him?" Haley's heart hammered against her ribs. "He's the sole heir," Camilla said, repeating what the voice on the phone must have said. "Dominic's will states that if anything happens to him, everything goes to Nico in a trust until he's 21. I get a stipend, a pathetic stipend." A cruel laugh escaped Camilla's lips. "So, if the boy is out of the picture, I get everything. Is that what you're saying?" Haley clamped a hand over her mouth to stop a gasp. They were planning to kill Nico. "It has to look like an accident," Camilla said hurriedly. "Or a disappearance. Dominic has enemies everywhere. If Nico goes missing, he'll blame the Irish mob or the triads. He'll never suspect me." Camilla hung up the phone. Haley heard footsteps approaching the door. Panic surged through her. If Camilla found her here, she was dead. Haley scrambled backward, grabbing her polishing cloth and frantically rubbing a spot on the buffet table just as Camilla walked out. Camilla stopped. Her eyes narrowed into slits as she looked at Haley. "How long have you been standing there?" Just arrived, Miss Vance," Haley stammered, keeping her head low. "The butler asked me to polish the silverware for tonight's dinner." Camilla walked over slowly, like a predator stalking prey. She reached out and lifted Haley's chin with a manicured finger. Her nails were sharp, digging into Haley's skin. "You have pretty eyes, Haley," Camilla said softly, her voice dripping with venom. It would be a shame if they saw things they shouldn't. Because in this house, people who see too much tend to have accidents. Do you understand? Yes, Miss Vance, Haley whispered. Good. Now get out of my sight. Haley fled to the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she dropped the cloth. She had to tell Dominic. She had to. But how? She was a maid. Camilla was his fiancée. Dominic was stressed, overworked, and desperate for peace. If she went to him without proof, Camilla would twist it. She would say Haley was stealing or lying or trying to seduce Dominic. Haley would be fired or worse, and then who would watch over Nico? That night, a storm rolled in off Lake Geneva. The sky turned a bruised purple, and thunder shook the foundations of the estate. Dominic was away again, meeting with union leaders in Detroit. He wasn't expected back for 48 hours. At 10:00 p.m., the house was quiet. The staff had retired to the servants' quarters in the annex. But Haley couldn't sleep. She had a bad feeling, a knot in her chest that wouldn't loosen. She put on her robe and crept through the connecting hallway into the main house. She wanted to check on Nico, just to make sure he was safe in his bed. When she reached the second floor, she saw Nico's door was open. Her blood ran cold. She ran into the room. The bed was empty. The sheets were cold. Nico's favorite teddy bear was lying on the floor, ripped. "Nico," she whispered. She heard a sound from the hallway, a heavy thud, like something being dragged. Haley peeked out. At the end of the long corridor, near the service elevator that led to the basement and the garage, she saw a figure. It was a man, large and dressed in black, carrying a large burlap sack over his shoulder. And walking beside him, holding a flashlight, was Camilla. The sack moved, a small, weak kick against the fabric. Haley bit her lip so hard she tasted copper. Nico. They were taking him out. Tonight. Haley didn't think. She didn't plan. She took off her shoes so she would be silent, and followed them. She followed them down the service elevator, her heart beating like a war drum. She watched them load the sack into the trunk of Camilla's Range Rover. Camilla got into the driver's seat. The large man got in the passenger side. Haley looked around frantically. The garage was filled with Dominic's luxury cars. She spotted an old gardener's truck parked near the exit, a beat-up Ford used for hauling mulch. The keys were usually left above the visor. As the Range Rover's tail lights disappeared into the rain-slicked driveway, Haley jumped into the truck. She prayed the engine would start. It sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. She killed the headlights. She had to follow them blindly into the storm. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew that if she lost sight of those taillights, Nico Valenti would be dead before sunrise. Haley gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "Hold on, Nico," she whispered to the windshield. "I'm coming." The old gardener's truck groaned as Haley navigated the muddy ruts of an abandoned logging road 10 miles north of the estate. She had turned off her headlights miles ago, driving by the terrifying, jagged flashes of lightning that tore through the sky. Ahead, the red taillights of the Range Rover finally stopped near a clearing surrounded by dense, skeletal pines. Haley killed the engine and coasted to a halt behind a thicket of bushes. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She cracked the window open. The sound of the rain was deafening, a relentless drumbeat on the metal roof. But through it, she heard the one sound she had dreaded, the thwack of a shovel hitting wet earth. She opened the door and slipped out, sinking ankle-deep into the freezing mud. She crept closer, using the tree line for cover. In the center of the clearing, illuminated by the headlights of the Range Rover, was a scene from a nightmare. The large man, Camilla had called him Silas during the drive, was waist-deep in a hole, tossing heavy clumps of clay over his shoulder. Camilla stood under a black umbrella, watching him with an impatient, bored expression. She was checking her watch. "Faster, Silas," she shouted over the wind. "I have a flight to catch in the morning to meet Dominic in Detroit. I need to be the grieving stepmother by breakfast." Lying on the wet grass near the hole was a wooden crate. It was a wine shipment box, reinforced and nailed shut. From inside, there was a muffled, frantic scratching sound. Haley clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. Nico. He was awake. He was inside that box. "It's deep enough," Silas grunted, climbing out. He was a giant of a man, his face obscured by a hood. He wiped his muddy hands on his pants. "You sure about this, boss? A bullet is cleaner. Faster." Camilla walked over to the box. She tapped the wood with the toe of her designer boot. "A bullet leaves evidence, Silas. A bullet implies murder." But a missing child? A child who ran away into the woods and vanished? That's a tragedy. And if they ever find him, well, nature will have done the work. No fingerprints on a skeleton. The cruelty was so absolute, so casual, that Haley felt dizzy. Camilla wasn't just killing a child, she was erasing him. Silas grunted and bent down to lift the crate. The box shook violently. A small, muffled cry pierced the air. "Dada!" It was the first word Nico had spoken in 2 years. Camilla stiffened. She leaned down, putting her lips close to the cracks in the wood. "Daddy isn't here, you little rat. Daddy is busy making money for me. Now go to sleep," she signaled Silas. "Drop it." Silas swung the crate over the hole and let go. Thud. The sound of the wood hitting the bottom of the grave vibrated through the ground. Haley felt it in her bones. "Fill it," Camilla ordered, turning her back and walking toward the car. "And make sure you pack the dirt tight. I don't want any sinkholes giving us away." Haley watched in paralyzed horror as the first shovelful of dirt hit the box, then another, and another. The scratching sounds from inside the box grew more frantic, then fainter, as the weight of the earth dampened the noise. 1 minute. That's all it took for the hole to be filled. Silas stomped on the fresh grave, packing the mud down until it was level with the surrounding forest floor. He dragged a dead branch over the spot to disguise the fresh dig. "Done," Silas said. "Good," Camilla replied, already sitting in the heated leather seat of the Range Rover. "Let's go. We have a timeline to keep." The car doors slammed shut. The engine purred to life. The headlights swept across the clearing, momentarily blinding Haley as she ducked behind an oak tree. Then, the vehicle turned around and splashed away down the logging road, leaving the forest in darkness once again. Haley was alone, and Nico was under 6 feet of heavy, wet earth. The moment the taillights vanished, Haley bolted. She didn't care about the noise anymore. She didn't care about the mud. She sprinted into the clearing, slipping and falling, scrambling on her hands and knees until she reached the spot where Silas had dragged the branch. "Nico!" she screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. "Nico, hold on!" She had no shovel. She had no tools. She looked around frantically, spotting a sharp, flat rock near the tree line. She grabbed it and slammed it into the mud, tearing at the earth. She dug like an animal. The rain was her enemy now, turning the dirt into a heavy sludge that slid back into the hole almost as fast as she could remove it. Her fingernails broke. Her fingers bled. The cold bit into her skin, numbing her hands, but the adrenaline fueled her. "He has minutes," she told herself. "Maybe less. The air in that box is running out." "I'm here, Nico! I'm here!" she sobbed, clawing at the clay. She dug until her muscles screamed, until her vision blurred with tears and rain. She was waist deep in the hole now, throwing mud over her shoulder. Thunk. Her rock hit wood. A fresh wave of energy surged through her. "Nico!" She abandoned the rock and used her bleeding hands to scrape away the remaining layer of dirt. She cleared the top of the crate. It was nailed shut. "No, no, no!" she gasped. She grabbed the edge of the lid and pulled. It wouldn't budge. It was reinforced shipping wood, designed to carry expensive wine across the ocean. She looked around the hole. She needed leverage. She scrambled out of the grave and ran to the edge of the woods, finding a thick, broken branch, hard oak. She jumped back into the hole and wedged the branch under the lid's edge. "Come on," she grunted, putting her entire body weight onto the makeshift lever. The wood creaked. A nail screeched in protest. "Open!" Haley screamed, pushing with everything she had left. Crack! The lid splintered and flew open. Haley dropped the branch and peered inside. Nico was curled into a tight ball, his face pale, his eyes closed. He wasn't moving. His teddy bear was clutched against his chest. "Nico," Haley whispered, terrified. She reached in and pulled his small, limp body out of the box, cradling him against her muddy chest. He was cold. So cold. She placed her ear against his mouth. Nothing. "No, please God, no," Haley begged. She laid him down on the muddy lid of the crate. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and breathed into his mouth. 1 breath, 2 breaths. She pressed on his small chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Breathe, Nico. Breathe for me." She breathed into him again. The rain washed the mud from his face, making him look like a porcelain doll. Suddenly, his body jerked. A hacking, wet cough erupted from his small lungs. He gasped, sucking in the cold night air with a desperate wheeze. Haley collapsed back against the dirt wall of the grave, sobbing with relief. She pulled him into her arms, rocking him back and forth. "I've got you. I've got you. You're safe." Nico clung to her, his small fingers digging into her arms. He was shaking violently, his eyes wide with a trauma that no child should ever know. He looked at Haley, and then he looked at the open grave. He buried his face in her neck and let out a silent scream, his body heaving. Haley knew they couldn't stay here. Camilla was smart. If she realized Haley was missing, or if she came back to check the grave. Haley struggled to stand, lifting Nico into her arms. He was heavy, dead weight in his exhaustion. She climbed out of the hole, her legs trembling. She carried him to the old gardener's truck. She placed him in the passenger seat and wrapped him in the dirty blanket she kept behind the seat. "We can't go home, Nico," she said, her voice shaking as she started the engine. "She'll be there. She'll kill us both." Nico looked at her, his eyes asking the question she was asking herself. "Where do we go?" Haley gripped the steering wheel. She had $20 in her pocket and a quarter tank of gas. She couldn't go to the police. Camilla had connections. The local sheriff played poker with Dominic. If Camilla spun a story that Haley had kidnapped the boy, the police would arrest Haley and hand Nico right back to the monster. "We have to wait for your dad," Haley said, backing the truck onto the road. "But we have to stay alive until he gets back." As she drove away, she glanced at the passenger seat. Nico was clutching something tightly in his hand. It wasn't his teddy bear. "What do you have there, sweetie?" Haley asked softly. Nico opened his hand. Resting in his palm was a shiny, silver object. It was a bracelet, a charm bracelet with a distinct, diamond-encrusted C. Haley's eyes widened. Camilla must have dropped it when she leaned over the box to whisper her poison. It was proof. It wasn't a video, and it wasn't a confession, but it was proof that Camilla had been at the grave. "Keep that safe, Nico," Haley said, a steely resolve hardening in her chest. "That little piece of metal is going to destroy her." Haley drove south, away from the estate, away from the lake. She found a cheap, run-down motel off the interstate, the Bluebird Inn. She paid cash for a room with no ID, telling the sleepy clerk her car broke down. Inside the room, it smelled of stale smoke and mildew, but it had a lock. Haley bathed the mud off Nico, wrapped him in a towel, and tucked him into the lumpy bed. She sat in a chair by the window, watching the parking lot through the curtains, holding a lamp base as a weapon. She didn't sleep. Back at the Rossi estate, the storm was clearing. Morning broke with a deceptive calm. At 8 a.m., the peaceful silence was shattered. "Gone?" Camilla's voice rang out through the mansion, a perfect performance of hysteria. "What do you mean, he's gone?" The head of security looked down at his shoes. "The window in his room was open, Miss Vance. His bed is empty. We're searching the grounds now." Camilla fell onto the sofa, sobbing dramatically into a handkerchief. "My poor baby. My poor Nico. Call Dominic. Tell him to come home immediately." As the butler ran to make the call, Camilla lowered the handkerchief for a split second. Her eyes were dry. She looked at the maid standing nearby, a new girl who had replaced Haley for the morning shift. "And where is that other girl? Haley?" Camilla asked sharply. We can't find her either, ma'am. Her room is empty." Camilla's fake tears stopped instantly. A cold, sharp fear spiked in her chest. The boy was supposed to be buried. The maid was supposed to be asleep. If they were both missing... Camilla stood up, her face twisting into a mask of pure rage. "Find them," she hissed to the head of security. "Forget the police. You find that girl, and when you find her, bring her to me, alive." The hunt was on. The private airstrip in Kenosha was slick with rain as the Gulfstream jet touched down. The engines hadn't even fully spooled down before the stairs lowered and Dominic Rossi descended. He didn't wait for an umbrella. He walked through the downpour, his face a mask of stone, flanked by 6 armed men. He looked like a king returning to a kingdom in flames. A convoy of black SUVs was waiting. Dominic slid into the back of the lead vehicle. "Status," he barked. "No sign of the boy, sir." His second-in-command, a scar-faced man named Frank, replied nervously. "We've locked down the airports and the train stations. We have men watching the highways." "And the girl?" Dominic asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Haley Brooks. Gone. Her room was cleared out. We found maps of the Canadian border in the staff trash bin." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Camilla found them?" "Yes, sir. Miss Vance found them this morning." Dominic stared out the window at the grey blur of the highway. It didn't make sense. Haley was quiet, timid. He had seen the way she looked at Nico, with tenderness, not malice. Why would she kidnap a child who couldn't speak? For money? She had never asked for a raise. To hurt him? She didn't have the eyes of a killer. When the convoy screeched to a halt in front of the Rossi estate, Camilla was waiting on the porch. She looked ravaged, perfectly ravaged. Her makeup was slightly smeared, her dress modest black. She ran down the steps and threw herself into Dominic's arms. "Oh, Dom, thank God!" she wailed, clinging to his wet coat. "She took him. That monster took our baby." Dominic stood stiffly, his eyes scanning the grounds. He gently peeled Camilla off him. "Tell me exactly what happened." "I went to wake him up," Camilla sobbed, leading him into the foyer. The window was open. I found a note, but it was just scribbles. And then we checked Haley's room. "She stole your mother's jewelry, Dom, and she took the gardener's truck." Camilla looked up at him, her eyes wide and pleading. "She was always jealous, Dom. She stared at you. She hated that I was marrying you. She took Nico to punish us." Dominic didn't speak. He walked into the library, the last place he had seen his son. The room was cold, He saw Nico's drawings on the floor. He knelt down and picked one up. It was a drawing of a woman holding hands with a small boy. The woman had yellow hair. Haley. Dominic's fist crumpled the paper. If she had hurt him, if she had touched a single hair on Nico's head, he would burn the world down to find her. "Find her," Dominic whispered, the command echoing off the walls. "Put a bounty on her head. $500,000. Alive. I want to kill her myself." Meanwhile, 40 miles south, the kidnapper was currently buying a carton of milk and a box of bandages at a gas station convenience store. Haley pulled her hoodie low over her face. She had parked the conspicuous gardener's truck behind a dumpster in the alley. She handed the cashier a crumpled $20 bill, her hands shaking. "Keep the change," she muttered, grabbing the bag. As she turned to leave, she froze. On the television, mounted above the counter, the news was playing. A breaking news banner flashed red. "Missing child, Nicholas Rossi. Suspect, Haley Brooks, armed and dangerous." Her driver's license photo was plastered on the screen, next to Nico's school picture. "Hey," the cashier said, squinting at her. He looked from the screen to her. "You look kinda like—" Haley didn't wait. She bolted. "Hey, stop!" the cashier shouted, reaching for the phone. Haley burst out the door, the bell jingling violently. She sprinted around the back of the building to the truck. She threw the bag inside and jumped into the driver's seat. "Get down, Nico!" she screamed. Nico huddled on the floorboard under the dirty blanket, curled into a ball. Haley flooded the engine, tires spinning on the wet gravel as she peeled out of the alley. As she merged onto the main road, she saw a black sedan swerve out of the gas station lot, following her. It wasn't the police. The windows were tinted too dark. It was a mercenary vehicle. "They found us," Haley whispered, panic seizing her throat. The sedan accelerated, bumping the back bumper of the old truck. Wham! Haley fought the steering wheel. She looked in the rearview mirror and saw the passenger window of the sedan roll down. A gun barrel emerged. "Hold on!" Haley yelled. She jerked the wheel hard to the right, taking a sharp turn onto a dirt path that led into a cornfield. The truck bounced violently, suspension groaning. The sedan followed, but it was low to the ground. It bottomed out on a deep rut, sparks flying. Haley didn't look back. She drove blindly through the stalks, crushing the crop, until she reached a service road on the other side. She was crying now, tears of pure terror streaming down her face. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't a driver. She was just a maid who loved a little boy. "We can't hide," she choked out. "They control the police. They control the news. Nowhere is safe." She looked at Nico. He was trembling, clutching the charm bracelet. There was only one place Camilla's men wouldn't dare to shoot. One place where Dominic's power was absolute, and where the cameras were owned by him, not the public. "We're going to the Iron Ridge," Haley said, wiping her eyes. "We're going to your father." The Iron Ridge steel mill was a city unto itself. Located on the industrial outskirts of Chicago, it was a landscape of towering smokestacks, molten fire, and grinding gears. It was also the headquarters of the Rossi crime family. Dominic stood in the central control tower, overlooking the factory floor. The heat radiating from the furnaces below did nothing to warm the ice in his veins. He had just received a call from the gas station clerk. They had been spotted. "They're heading south," Frank said, holstering his phone. "Silas is pursuing, but he lost them in the cornfields near Joliet." "Why south?" Dominic frowned. "The border is north. The airport is north." Maybe she's panicked, running blind. "No," Dominic murmured. "She's not running." Suddenly, the radio on Frank's belt crackled. "Breach at the south gate. Repeat, breach at the south gate. A vehicle just rammed the barricade." Dominic moved to the window. Far below, at the main entrance, a battered, mud-caked pickup truck had smashed through the wooden barrier arm and was careening toward the main office building. Security guards were swarming it, weapons drawn. "Don't shoot!" Dominic roared into the radio. "I want her alive!" He sprinted for the door, Frank and his team following close behind. Down in the courtyard, the truck sputtered and died. Steam hissed from the radiator. The driver's door flew open, and Haley stumbled out. She looked wild, covered in graveyard mud, her hair matted, a cut bleeding on her forehead from hitting the steering wheel. A dozen guards had their guns trained on her chest. "Get on the ground!" a guard screamed. "Hands behind your head!" Haley ignored them. She staggered around to the passenger side of the truck. "Stop or we fire!" the guard yelled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I said hold your fire!" Dominic's voice boomed across the courtyard like a thunderclap. The guards parted as Dominic Rossi strode into the circle. He looked like the angel of death. He held a heavy pistol at his side. He walked straight toward Haley, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and confusion. "You have 5 seconds, Dominic growled, raising the gun slowly, "to tell me where my son is, before I end you." Haley didn't flinch. She didn't look at the gun. She looked him dead in the eye, her blue eyes blazing with a ferocity he had never seen in her. "He's right here," she rasped. She ripped the passenger door open. For a moment, there was silence. The only sound was the distant hum of the blast furnaces. Then, a small movement. A sneaker appeared, then a leg. Nico slid out of the truck. He was filthy. His pajamas were caked in clay. He looked like a ghost dug up from the earth. Dominic dropped his gun. It clattered loudly on the concrete. "Nico!" he whispered, his voice breaking. Nico looked at his father. He took a shaky step forward. Then he ran. Dominic fell to his knees, catching the boy as he collided with his chest. He buried his face in Nico's neck, hugging him so tight it looked like he was trying to merge their souls. A guttural sob tore from Dominic's throat, a sound of raw, unadulterated relief that made the hardened guards look away. Haley watched them, her adrenaline finally fading. The world started to spin, her knees gave out, and she slumped against the side of the truck, sliding down to the asphalt. Dominic looked up. He was crying, but his eyes were scanning Nico. He saw the dirt, the graveyard clay. He saw the bruises on Nico's wrists. He looked at Haley, really looked at her. He saw the same clay on her clothes. He saw her bleeding hands, fingernails torn off, raw flesh exposed. Those were hands that had dug through earth. He realized in a horrifying second. She hadn't kidnapped him. She had unburied him. Dominic gently set Nico down and crawled over to Haley. He reached out, not with violence, but with terrifying gentleness, taking her bleeding hands in his. "Who did this?" Dominic asked. His voice was a low vibration, quieter than a whisper, but scarier than a scream. "Who put him in the ground, Haley?" Haley struggled to keep her eyes open. She pointed a shaking finger at Nico. The bracelet," she whispered. Nico walked over. He opened his small hand. The diamond sea charm glinted in the industrial lights. Dominic stared at the charm. He recognized it. He had bought that bracelet for Camilla in Paris 2 months ago. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman in his bed. The woman he was going to marry. She hadn't just tried to kill his son. She had buried him alive. A darkness descended over Dominic's face, a transformation so complete it was terrifying to behold. The grieving father vanished. The Mafia Don returned. He stood up, pulling Haley to her feet and supporting her weight with one arm. He looked at Frank. "Get the on-site doctor for her and Nico. Guard them with your life. If anyone comes near this room, who isn't me, kill them." "Where are you going, boss?" Frank asked, seeing the look in Dominic's eyes. Dominic picked up his gun from the concrete and racked the slide. "I have a wedding rehearsal to attend." He walked toward his armored SUV. "Call Silas," Dominic said to Frank, his voice devoid of humanity. "Tell him I found the girl. Tell him to bring Camilla here. Tell her I have a surprise." The trap was set. The king knew the truth. And now, the queen was going to bleed. The Iron Ridge steel mill was less a factory and more a cathedral of fire. It sat on the industrial edge of the city, a sprawling beast of corrugated metal and smokestacks that scraped the grey belly of the sky. Inside, the noise was a physical thing, a rhythmic, deafening thrum of pistons and the hiss of molten slag that vibrated in the marrow of anyone who stepped foot on the floor. Dominic Rossi stood on the central catwalk, suspended 30 feet above the rivers of liquid steel that glowed a violent, churning orange. The heat up here was oppressive, enough to curl paper and singe hair, but Dominic didn't seem to feel it. He stood with his back to the furnace, his hands clasped behind him, watching the heavy steel service doors at the far end of the gantry. He had washed the graveyard mud from his hands, but he felt permanently stained. The old Dominic, the one who thought he could buy happiness with diamonds and mergers, had died in that cornfield the moment he saw his son walk out of the truck. The man standing on the catwalk now was something ancient and terrifying. The service doors groaned open, breaking the mechanical rhythm of the mill. Camilla stepped through, followed closely by Silas. She was dressed for a victory lap, wearing a pristine, white cashmere trench coat that cost more than the workers below made in a year. Her raven hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless chignon, and her lips were painted a deep, blood red. She walked with the confidence of a woman who believed she had just inherited a kingdom, her heels clicking sharply against the metal grating. She stopped 10 feet from Dominic, wrinkling her nose at the smell of sulfur and burning ozone. "Dominic," she called out, her voice smooth, cutting through the industrial roar. She offered him a sad, weary smile, a perfect mask of grieving stepmotherhood. "Frank told me you found her. He said the chase ended here. Is it over?" Dominic didn't move. He stared at her, his eyes dark voids that reflected the orange glow of the fires below. "It is." Camilla let out a long, shuddering breath and took a step closer, reaching out a hand as if to comfort him. "Thank God. I was so terrified, Dom. When I saw his empty bed, I thought I would die." She looked around the empty factory floor, feigning confusion. "But where is she? Where is the girl? I want to look her in the eye. I want to ask her why she would try to take our family away from us." "You want to see her?" Dominic asked, his voice low, a dangerous rumble that competed with the machinery. "I need closure, Dom," Camilla said, placing her hand on the lapel of his suit. "We both do. So we can move on. So we can mourn Nico properly and rebuild." Dominic looked down at her hand. He didn't flinch, but the air around him seemed to drop 20 degrees. "I promised you a surprise, Camilla. I promised you the truth." "The truth is all I want," she whispered, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Dominic's lips curled into a humorless smile. He lifted his hand and snapped his fingers. The sharp sound echoed through the vast chamber. High above them, in the glass-walled overseer's control booth that looked down upon the factory floor, a floodlight clicked on. Camilla squinted against the sudden glare. As her eyes adjusted, the color drained from her face so fast it looked as if she had been struck physically. Inside the booth, insulated from the noise and the heat, sat Haley. She was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, holding a steaming mug of cocoa. And sitting on her lap, clutching his teddy bear and looking down at the catwalk with wide, curious eyes, was Nico. The scream that tore from Camilla's throat was primal. She stumbled back, her heels slipping on the grate, her hand flying to her mouth. No, that's impossible." "Impossible?" Dominic asked, stepping into her personal space, forcing her to back up toward the railing. "Why is it impossible, Camilla? Is it because he was supposed to be 6 feet under the wet earth of the North Woods?" Camilla began to shake. It wasn't a tremble. It was a violent vibration of pure terror. She spun around to Silas, her eyes wild. "Do something! Silas, shoot them! Shoot them now!" Silas, the giant who had dug the hole, didn't reach for his weapon. He stood with his arms crossed, looking at the floor, refusing to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance," Silas grunted, his voice heavy with regret. "I dig ditches. I break legs. But I don't kill kids. And I definitely don't die for you." "You traitor!" she shrieked, swinging her purse at him. But he didn't budge. She turned back to Dominic, the tears starting to flow now, real tears, born of a terrified realization that the walls were closing in. "Dom, listen to me! It's a trick! It's a lie! That Maid, she's twisted. She brainwashed him. She set this up to frame me because she wants your money. She's been jealous of me since the day she arrived." Dominic watched her unravel with a cold detachment. "You think Haley did this?" Yes. Camilla grasped at the lie like a drowning woman grabbing a lifeline. "She kidnapped him. She hid him. She's trying to destroy us." Dominic reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. "Then explain this." He held up his hand. Dangling from his index finger was a silver charm bracelet. The diamond-encrusted C caught the light of the furnaces, spinning slowly, hypnotically. Camilla stared at the jewelry. Her breath hitched. "You dropped this," Dominic said softly. "In the grave. My men found it when they went back to fill in the hole you left open." The evidence was absolute. There was no spinning this. The silence that stretched between them was heavier than the steel beams overhead. Camilla's face changed. The mask of the grieving victim melted away, replaced by the snarling visage of a cornered animal. She stopped crying. She straightened her spine, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "It was for us," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "I did it for us, Dominic." "For us?" Dominic repeated, incredulous. "He's broken," Camilla screamed, gesturing wildly at the control booth. "Look at him. He's a mute. He's weak. He sits in corners and cries over a dead mother. Is that who you want running the Rossi Empire one day? A cripple?" She grabbed Dominic's lapels, shaking him. "We could have started over. We could have had our own children. Strong sons. Perfect daughters. I was trying to cut out the rot so we could flourish, Dom. I was doing what you were too weak to do." Dominic grabbed her wrists. He didn't squeeze, but his grip was iron. He removed her hands from his suit as if she were something filthy. "Nico is perfect," Dominic roared. The sound erupted from his chest, louder than the blast furnaces, echoing off the metal walls. "He is my son. He is the only pure thing in this entire God-forsaken life I've built. And you put him in a box like garbage." He shoved her backward. Camilla stumbled, her back hitting the railing. She looked down. 20 feet below, the vat of molten slag bubbled and popped, a cauldron of liquid death. "Frank," Dominic commanded. From the shadows, Frank stepped forward. He was carrying a wooden crate. It was a wine shipment box, reinforced, with air holes drilled into the side. He placed it on the catwalk with a heavy thud. Camilla looked at the box, then at Dominic. Her arrogance shattered instantly. She dropped to her knees, clasping her hands together in prayer. "No," she sobbed, her voice breaking into a high-pitched wail. "No, Dom. Please. Not the box. I'm sorry. I'll sign the prenup. I'll leave the state. Just don't put me in the dark." Dominic towered over her. "You like boxes, Camilla. You thought a box was a suitable home for my son. I believe in the old laws, an eye for an eye, a grave for a grave." "I'm pregnant," she lied, screaming it out. "I'm pregnant with your child." "No, you're not," Dominic said, his voice flat. "I had your medical records pulled an hour ago. You're barren, Camilla, just like your soul," he signaled Frank. Frank moved toward her. Camilla scrambled backward on her hands and knees, screaming, kicking, completely undone. "Wait!" Dominic shouted. Frank stopped. Camilla froze, her chest heaving, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. She looked up at Dominic with a glimmer of pathetic hope. "I'm not going to bury you," Dominic said, smoothing his jacket. "That would be too quick. You'd suffocate in 20 minutes. You wouldn't have time to think about what you did. And besides, I promised Haley I wouldn't kill you. She thinks it would be bad for Nico's soul if his father became a murderer." Camilla let out a sob of relief, collapsing against the grating. "Thank you, Dom. Oh God, thank you." "Don't thank me," Dominic said, his eyes shifting to the large steel doors at the far end of the mill. "I'm not the one punishing you. I'm just the delivery boy." "The twist," Dominic whispered, leaning down so only she could hear. "I called in a favor, not from the mob, but from the law." The steel doors opened again. This time, blue and red lights flashed from outside, reflecting off the metal walls. 2 police cruisers were parked there, along with a sleek black government sedan. Out of the sedan stepped the district attorney, looking grim. But it was the man who stepped out behind him that made Camilla gasp. He was an older man, leaning heavily on a cane, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. "Father," Camilla whispered. It was Judge Julian Vance, the strictest, most unforgiving federal judge in the state, and the father Camilla had not spoken to in 5 years. He walked slowly onto the catwalk, the police officers flanking him. He looked down at his daughter, who was kneeling in the dirt, and his expression was one of absolute, crushing disappointment. "You have disgraced our blood," the judge said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Attempted murder of a minor, kidnapping, extortion, fraud." "Daddy, help me," Camilla begged, reaching out a hand. "He framed me. Mr. Rossi provided me with the recording of your phone call to the Vegas syndicate," the judge said coldly, "and the forensic evidence from the shovel, and the testimony of his maid. It is over, Camilla. I made a deal," Dominic told her, stepping back to stand beside Haley, who had come down from the booth with Nico. "I give the DA the evidence of your burial plot and your Vegas debts. In exchange, they forget about Haley's traffic violations and the stolen truck. You're going to prison, Camilla. Federal prison. No bail. No parole." Dominic leaned in close, offering a cruel, wolfish grin. "And when the other inmates in general population find out you buried a 6-year-old boy alive, let's just say, you'll wish you were in that box." As the officers hauled Camilla to her feet and dragged her away, she screamed curses, thrashing and kicking, but nobody listened. As she was shoved into the back of the cruiser, she looked back one last time. She saw Nico standing on the catwalk. He wasn't hiding behind Haley anymore. He was standing tall, holding his father's hand. He looked at the woman who had tried to erase him, and he didn't cry. He simply raised his small hand and waved goodbye. 6 months later, the Rossi estate was unrecognizable. The heavy velvet drapes that had made the mansion feel like a mausoleum were gone, replaced by sheer, white linen that billowed in the summer breeze. The windows were thrown open, letting the scent of the lake and the blooming lilies fill the halls. But the biggest change wasn't the decor. It was the sound. The house was filled with music. Hayley sat at the grand piano in the drawing room, her brow furrowed in concentration, as her fingers moved clumsily over the ivory keys. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. She was wearing a sundress the color of a summer sky, and her hair hung loose in soft golden waves. No, like this, a small voice corrected her. Nico, sitting beside her on the bench, reached over. His small fingers danced effortlessly over the keys, playing the melody with a grace that belied his age. "Okay, maestro," Hayley laughed, nudging him with her shoulder. "You show me." Nico giggled, a sound that 6 months ago Dominic Rossi thought he would never hear again. The therapy, the stability, and the overwhelming love had unlocked the boy's voice. He still stuttered when he was excited, and he still slept with a nightlight, but the shadows were retreating. Dominic leaned against the doorframe, sipping his coffee, watching them. For the first time in his life, the knot of tension in his chest was gone. He walked over to the piano, placing a hand on Nico's shoulder and kissing the top of Hayley's head. "You two are making a lot of noise," he teased gently. "We're practicing," Nico said, beaming, "for the party." "Ah, the party," Dominic said. "Actually, before the party, we have one stop to make." "Where?" Hayley asked, looking up at him. Her eyes were bright, no longer filled with the fear of a hunted animal. "The courthouse," Dominic said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Hayley's breath hitched. She stopped playing. Dominic knelt down on one knee right there in the drawing room, next to the piano bench. He opened the box. It wasn't the gaudy, ice-cube-sized diamond he had given Camilla to seal a business merger. It was a sapphire, deep and blue, surrounded by small, delicate diamonds. It was simple. It was real. "I have adoption papers to finalize for Nico," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. "But the judge says it looks better if the child has a mother and a father who are officially a team." He looked at Hayley. "You saved his life, Hayley. And then you saved mine. I don't want a maid. I don't want a housekeeper. I want a partner. I want a wife." Hayley looked at the ring, then at Dominic, and finally at Nico. The little boy was nodding vigorously, a massive grin splitting his face. "Say yes," Nico whispered loudly. Tears spilled over Hayley's lashes. She reached out and touched Dominic's face. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Dominic Rossi had been a king of the underworld, a man who believed power was built on fear and silence. But as he pulled Hayley into his arms and felt his son hugging them both, he realized the truth. The maid's miracle wasn't just digging a boy out of the ground, it was digging a father out of the darkness. The grave in the woods was empty, but the house and their hearts were finally full. And that, my friends, is the story of how a brave maid, with nothing to lose, defeated a monster who had everything. It shows us that true loyalty isn't bought with money, and true family isn't always blood. It's the people who are willing to walk through the fire, the rain, and the mud for you. Camilla thought she could bury the truth, but she forgot one fundamental law of nature. Seeds only grow when they are planted in the dark. Hayley didn't just dig up a boy that night. She dug up the future of the entire Rossi empire. What would you have done if you were in Hayley's shoes? Would you have run to save yourself or stayed to fight a war you couldn't win? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story of betrayal, revenge, and redemption. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.